Welcome to the Nebraska Hawk's Nest. These guys are brave! They're Hawkeyes, living in enemy territory. Listen, these guys are way past their prime, but they're still Hawkeyes! They're spreading the Hawkeye hype to all of Nebraska. The frost advisory is canceled! Corn huskers? More like corn shuckers. Are you ready for this podcast? Let's go Hawks!
All right, welcome back to the Nebraska Hawk's Nest. We are lucky enough to be joined by Iowa Hawkeye, in my opinion, legend James Morris. How's it going, man?
It's going really well. I'm ready to run through a wall after that intro video, man. That kid had me excited. That was really cool.
The Hawkeye hype kid, man, he's awesome. We just recently released, just yesterday, actually, we did an interview with him where I was completely out of it, but my kids sat down and they just think he's the coolest kid ever. So they had a list of questions and they're like, could we interview him? And I'm like, that's genius. Absolutely, you can. So we just released that yesterday and it turned out awesome. He's the kid's got moxie. He's really good at what he does. He just comes from an awesome family too. So they're really great people.
Yeah, that was exciting to watch, man. It got me excited. I got jitters.
They did a version of, they did like a George Kittle one, and this kid, Hawkeye hype kid, he redid it, and they played it pregame at Kinnick a handful of times. So he's blowing up. He's pretty popular.
Good for him.
Dude. Yeah. He's damn good at it. That's for sure.
Awesome.
Hey, James, tell everybody right now about what's going on with you in life. All the Hawkeye fans love to know, like, married, have kids, where you're living, and what you're doing for work.
Yeah. So right now I live in Waukee with my wife. We've been married for 6 years now. We got married right out of school. And she is actually pregnant with our first kid. So she's about 17.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So we're really excited about that. We're getting ready to tell the parents the sex this weekend at Easter. So it'll be a nice surprise for them. But life in Waukee is good. She's a student at Des Moines University. In town here in their physician assistant program. And then I work for Principal downtown Des Moines, and I'm a member of their real estate investing team. So I work with a group of guys that cover the Northeast. So it'd be New Jersey, New York, Boston, and we're sort of responsible for Principal and then some of our other clients' real estate investments in those markets. Specifically, I'm on the debt side. So you can think of it as like being a loan officer for really, really, really big loans.
That's awesome. And that Principal's a really well-respected group in Des Moines that everybody knows about. And I believe the Iowa Cubs Stadium is still named through them, right? Principal Park. See, when I grew up in Des Moines and it was called Sec Taylor Stadium forever. Okay. And so, baseball fans, like, they don't like change at all. So everybody in Des Moines that I still know, they still call it Sec Taylor Stadium. They're like, we can't call it anything else. It was called Sec Taylor Stadium for like 40 years and now it's Principal Park, but I love that place. A ton of good memories.
Well, okay. Yeah. And I'm figuring out different kind of Des Moines vocab words that are a little bit different than any other places like I've lived. So I never heard the term squinny until I moved to Des Moines. Yeah. So I'm like, what in the world is a squinny? So maybe you could tell everybody what a squinny is.
Okay. It's funny that you said that because we used to go squinny hunting when we were kids. I had a buddy of mine that lived out in the country and we would fill up some buckets. I sound like such a redneck telling this story.
No, you're fine.
And it's awesome. And of course, we're in high school and we'd maybe sneak a couple Coors Lights out with us. And we would fill the hole with water. And then one of us would wait at the other end with a bat and when the squinty would pop his head out,
Oh
ping!
man, I thought you were gonna say you had like a 22 or like a BB gun. You
No,
just
we
cut
took
the
him out with
middleman out.
we took him out with a bat because they used to like eat flowers and get into the
Oh
gardens
yeah,
and tear the yard up. So we used
they're
to go
they're
squinty hunting all the time.
they're my nemesis in the backyard right now. My grandpa was a big gardener, and so I kind of like, inherited a little bit of it by accident. So one thing I tried to do this year was like go out. I went out to actually Waveland
Okay.
in the fall, and then they had a bunch of acorns on the oak trees all throughout Waveland. So I'm like, my wife and I just bought an acreage in Cumming, and so I kind of wanted to get some oak trees going, and I was
Okay.
wondering if I could start them on my back porch. And so I went out and ended up, harvesting a bunch of acorns and then tried to get them to grow over the winter.
Yeah.
Or stratify.
Yeah.
And the squinties were getting in there and digging them out of the pots and stuff. So I got these cages on them now, but I was like, man, I needed a baseball bat this winter. So, but anyways, for people from Eastern Iowa, we called them ground squirrels.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds
So
a
I'm
little
like,
bit more normal than
yeah,
squinty.
a little more descriptive. I'm like, what is a squinty?
Yeah.
There's people at work talking about.
I don't know why we called him that. That was just always like what it was called. So I'm like, yeah, we're going to go squinty hunting today.
I'm trying to figure out what is Beggar's Night and what was wrong with Halloween and why
Yeah.
we can't just do stuff on Halloween. So Taylor and I are talking when our kid's born, we might be the only people that are out trick-or-treating on Halloween.
So you guys
to protest.
You didn't have Baker's Night?
No, we just said Halloween. Like
Really?
that's why yeah.
All right.
I'm trying to
I
figure
grew
that
up with
out.
that. I guess I just thought that was normal too. I thought everybody did that. Not
What,
you're making my whole childhood feel real super weird right now.
well, what does Omaha do? Are they Beggar's Night or are they Halloween?
I'll be honest with you. Like I live about an hour north of Omaha, and we live on
Okay.
like a little acreage too, like on about 3 or 4
Gotcha.
acres. And we I don't know what they do. Honestly, I thought that they had a separate night too, but that's interesting. I didn't know in Eastern Iowa. See, no, that was my thing too. I always said, why in the heck don't we just do the trick or treat on Halloween? That makes more sense. And that's funny that you brought that up because I've said that a million times, but everybody's like, I don't know. That's just what we do. That's how it is.
This is an awesome conversation because I've had this same conversation with like 100 people from Des Moines. So you might be in Nebraska, but you are still very Des Moines to your core, boss.
Yeah, I lived there till I was 18, went away to college, came back for a couple years, and then got drugged back to Nebraska. So I'm probably here for life, but I'm representing the black and gold here very strong every day.
I love it. That's awesome.
That's pretty cool, though. You're learning the little Des Moines things.
Yeah.
The one tip I'll give you is if you guys love like Italian food, like the best pizza you'll ever have, get over to the south side of Des Moines. There is a ton of good places. Like Scornovacos, Baratas, Paisanos.
Yeah. We were just at Timea and Sons last week.
Yeah, that place is fantastic. That's one of the core, the Latin King, like all that stuff. That's on the east side. But if you want really good Italian food, and there's like Italian markets and things like that, I'm about the most pale Norwegian looking kid you'll ever find. So I'm not Italian, but I had a lot of Italian friends and lived in Italian neighborhoods. And so I learned a lot from that. And I'm addicted to it the rest of my life. But then you have it anywhere else and it's not as good. Like it's super authentic out there. It's awesome.
Yeah. Baratas is on the short list. We were so my wife's been vaccinated. I'm getting my first dose this week.
Okay.
And as things kind of slowly begin to normalize, we're like, what are some things we want to do to sort of make up for lost time? And I'm like, hey, we've lived in Des Moines almost 4 years now. We haven't tried all the mom and pop staples, so let's hit up the places on the east side, on the south side that are sort of, that's where the locals go. Right. And so that's kind of one of the goals. So we're like, the first time it was Timea and Sons, and then we got a list of other places we want to hit up.
That's definitely what you got to do. What's it like in Waukee? Because I know when I lived in Des Moines, Waukee was a blip on the radar. It was just getting ramped up and getting going. And now it's huge. It's blown up.
Yeah, it's the epitome of suburban sprawl. We live in town, so in the triangles, what they call it, by the grain elevator and the co-op. And so if there was a town component to Waukee, that would be it. But as far as the rest of it, it's like North Liberty for folks from Eastern Iowa, but 4 or 5 times as big. So it's suburban sprawl, right? I mean, look at west and north of Chicago. It's just as far as you can see homes, and as fast as they can get the materials, they're throwing up more homes. Great school districts, well amenitized, but there's not necessarily a main street or a community vibe, I'll say.
Okay. I was gonna circle back too. I forgot to say with your whole garden thing. If anybody flips you crap about that, there's nothing better than having a killer garden and then having like vegetables for dinner right out of your garden. Like
Absolutely.
anybody wants to run their mouth, I don't care. Like my wife and I, we don't have like we live right by the water, so
Hmm.
our soil's a little sandy. It's not that beautiful, rich Iowa soil, and so we had to dump a bunch of soil on it, and we planted a garden. And man, it's just like living luxury having that out there, just
Absolutely.
for every meal. But if you want to kill those squinnies, pop a hose down that hole and
Okay.
sit there with the baseball bat. Just you're gonna go swinging, man. Swing for the fences.
Oh man, yeah. I got to tip my neighbors off beforehand so they know I'm not crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let them know because they'll think you're nuts too. So
Right.
our neighbors probably thought that we were insane too, but hey, that just comes with the territory. All
Sure.
right, so we got to get down to down to the serious stuff now. When you were coming out of high school, it seems like you were pretty dead set from the beginning on being a Hawkeye. And I know Stanford was really hot on your trail.
Yeah.
You're a real intelligent guy, always a good student. How hard was it to say no to Stanford? And did you ever at any point, especially, I'm sure your dad seems like the type of guy that he's not going to influence you. He's going to say, hey, make the decision that's best for you. Greg just seems like he's that kind of guy. Unless he did otherwise, you tell us. But what was that recruitment process like? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, man. You did your homework. Yeah. So I got offered by Iowa when I was a sophomore. And then the summer after my sophomore year is when Stanford offered me. And this was before Stanford was really good.
Yeah.
So my junior year of high school, I believe I'm getting my dates right, is when Toby Gerhardt had his really good season. It was like a Heisman finalist and then put them on the map. And then from there, they took off, and then Harbaugh left and Shaw took over. And it's just been, they win 10, 12 games a year like clockwork.
Yeah.
So the idea of if you were a serious high school football player, that had good prospects to be a good college player and then dreamed of playing in the NFL, the idea of going to Stanford was probably not as appealing.
Mm.
And it's also interesting to think about sort of like the academic allure of Stanford, and the effect that had on me as a small town Iowa kid, was not very pronounced. Like, oh, it's a good academic school, but I had no perception of sort of the universe of the Ivy Leagues, and that there were these careers called management consulting and investment banking and all of these things that, no idea, right? And it just really wasn't a concern. So as far as turning down going to a place like Iowa and going to a place like Stanford on the basis that it would open doors to me that I couldn't even imagine, it just didn't even register for me as a 16-year-old in a town of 2,000 people whose dad worked for the football team, and all I wanted to do was play football, right? It just so happened to be that I was a good student. It just wasn't even on my radar. I loved Iowa. I always want to go to Iowa. I certainly do not regret going to Iowa. I mean, everybody has things where it's like, oh, I'd do this a little bit different. I'd speak up here. I wouldn't do that. Don't get me wrong, I have that, but I don't necessarily regret it. It's probably one of those things where I say to myself, if I had a second life, maybe I'd do that, and sorry about that.
That's totally okay. I got my dog barking in the background, so don't worry about that.
But the ultimate thing I will say too is my wife and I dated in high school. She ended up going to Iowa, had a great academic run at Iowa. We got married right after my senior year, and I couldn't imagine. It would have been extremely hard, to do that had I gone to Stanford. So, for that reason, I mean, it's like no consideration on my part. But it is interesting now in my job at principal that, particularly working in the Northeast, you start to bump into a lot of people from those communities, right? Your Stanfords, your Northwestern, Chicago's, Ivy Leagues, and kind of rub elbows with that universe and see just really how different it is than being from Iowa. But that said, I mean, listen, Iowa's great. We love Iowa. There's a reason we chose to move to Des Moines, and not stay out there. So, yeah, all that to say, it was not as serious of a decision-making process as maybe what you might think. You know,
Okay.
we were pretty biased towards Iowa, and it was like, you know, I'm going to Iowa. I didn't even take a visit. You know, they came to the high school Stanford coaches did, and we kind of had to sit down. And it's like, listen, guys, I want to go to Iowa. That's what I want to do. That's my dream. And that was kind of it. But I do remember when I got the scholarship offer, Jim Harbaugh called me at my house, my parents' house, because I don't think I had a cell phone at the time.
Okay.
And I talked to that guy for like an hour and a half on the phone. And he just would not let me off the phone. And, you know, he has a reputation for being a persistent recruiter.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of the things where I'm like, Coach, man, I got to eat. And he's like, well, wait, let me tell you about this. And so we ended up talking about, I don't know, I think my only exposure to Stanford at that point had been I saw the movie Orange County with Jack Black.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Great movie.
Yeah,
so I'm trying to
funny.
talk to this guy about this movie and like, yeah, give him the synopsis. And he had no idea. He's like, what? Like the brother's a stoner, what? Like, yeah, it was just, yeah. So
Harbaugh's one of those guys that like he eats and drinks and breathes football, and he probably doesn't really know a whole lot else of what's going on out there. But Orange County, definitely underrated movie. It's freaking hilarious.
I had no idea about the guy, and then like looking back on that conversation, I mean, this guy's got 1960s black frame glasses and wears pleated khakis in 2020. You know, and I'm trying to talk to this guy about like, you know, alternative lifestyle. You know, yeah. So it was just a weird memory.
The thing that, you know, we always got to keep in mind too is, you know, University of Iowa is no academic slouch. That's one of the best, you know, public institutions in the country too. So, you know, you definitely had that on your side. And once that, you know, black and gold gets running through your veins as a kid, and you have the opportunity to go play there, especially a kid growing up in Iowa, I don't know that that's something that any kid could walk away from, regardless of like who offers you, because that's a lifelong dream. And that's what, you know, on the basketball side, I always think it's kind of odd. You know, we get a top tier high school recruit, and a lot of times they'll end up going to like a North Carolina or something like that. And it's like, well, they probably were never big Hawkeye fans to begin with, then, because once that gets in your blood, you can't really see yourself anywhere else. I wanted to ask you too about probably one of the big draws to you of you going there with your dad, Greg, who we have a ton of respect for, and is such a great guy. And I just think there's so many interesting things with your guys' relationship. Tell us about when, you know, because I had a very similar situation as you did with my stepdad coming into my life. So when I read about your story, it really hit home with me, and I really felt like I could, you know, put myself in your shoes. Tell us about what it was like with Greg coming into your life and becoming your stepdad, and how he changed your life.
Yeah, man, we're getting into the really. You did your homework. I'll say it again.
I'm a James Morris fan. I'm not just some dude. Okay, like I'm a fan, man. Awesome. You gotta do your homework too. You took the time took the time out of your day to sit down with us. I need to make sure I'm prepared.
So, I'm adopted. Greg is my adopted father. My mother is my biological mother. And so my biological parents divorced when I was 11, and they had a pretty tumultuous relationship, you know, and there were things that were just not good things, right? It wasn't a good situation. And that had manifested itself in my life and my brother's life. And I would say, you know, if you were to look at 11-year-old James or 9-year-old Jake, that's my brother's name, you probably would say these are not promising young kids, you know, they're little hellions. Right, would be how it would be described. But we both had high aptitude. I mean, there was talent there, you know, athletically and intellectually. And then my mom was a single mom for a little while there. And my brother and I were latchkey kids in Iowa City, getting into trouble and just kind of doing that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And then my mom started dating Greg. And so that was kind of a really interesting experience for an 11-year-old who was coming from what was probably a bad marriage, bad household, and not a lot of structure, to then being a latchkey kid. And I'm not kidding you. Like, I would get out of school at 11 years old, you know, at Regina, and I just go downtown Iowa City and jack around, or just walk around, you know, or like shoplift candy bars from Hy-Vee, like that type of crap, you know, like just that's what you did.
Yeah.
And and then Greg kind of came into our life and really added a lot of structure and a lot of discipline, but was also sort of that positive male role model, right? Continuously employed, embraced responsibility, goal oriented, got us participating in activities. Up until that point, I think the first time I ever played organized sports was like 12 years old. I just, it was just kind of a run around neighborhood kid, didn't play sports until I was 12. So it's always interesting. I talk to people in Des Moines and they'll say like, my kid's 8 years old. What do I need to do to make sure he gets a D1 scholarship? I'm like, have really good genetics, and don't burn them out, because that's 95% of it. Like you're not going to bootstrap your way into a D1 program.
No,
maybe D2, maybe D3, but
yeah.
So and I'm living proof of that, right? I had no structure up until the time I was 12, hit puberty, genetics take over. You have good discipline, you have good support system at home, and then, things just kind of play themselves out. So yeah, that was kind of my childhood into my adolescence, and then things just continued to improve. I continued to mature, continued to excel athletically and academically, and then just kind of kept that going when I got to Iowa. And then, I would say probably after my sophomore year, I started to develop maybe, I'll say like, genuine sense of self, genuine sense of maturity, start to develop, some long-term goals. And that would be kind of when I'd say that was sort of the completion of my childhood, right? When I was like 20 years old. So
putting myself into your shoes and thinking about where I was at that point in my life as a kid, that had to have been a hard transition, kind of just being able to, like you said, a latchkey kid doing your thing and doing whatever you wanted to do. Was that a tough transition going from the way things were to more of a structured lifestyle with Greg in your life?
Yeah, it was kind of a tough time period in one sense. My parents were freshly divorced, and, I haven't seen my biological father, since I was 11.
Yeah.
And we were at Regina because we were a Catholic family. And Regina's kind of, it's an interesting community in that there's really good families there, right? But it's kind of a combination of well-to-dos within the city. It's a private school. And then the diehard Catholics, right? The people that are like, I'm sending my kid to private school, I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And my sense is that just general run-of-the-mill middle class folks are like, I'm going to send my kid to a good public school, and that's what it is, right? So these private schools like that, they seem to be barbelled from like a cultural, socioeconomic standpoint. And we were not necessarily on the affluent side of that barbell. And so I would tell you, I didn't have like great friendships, at that elementary school. I had a couple.
Yeah.
And then moved to Solon, which is sort of like a small town public school. It's just everybody knows everybody, right? And I'm the new kid and I don't play sports. And so that was tough too, changing schools in 6th, 7th grade, middle school, everything's changing. So it was, and then I'm getting adopted. I've got this new dad, like, it's things you don't think about when you're that age, but then you look back and you're like, whoa, that's kind of a big life shift for a young person. So for things to kind of work out as well as they did, I think is a big testament to my parents, more than anything. Yeah, we're getting into the weeds. Everybody's going to know like my personal business. I'm trying to keep it.
It's interesting stuff though. And, I say that again.
I'm trying to keep it as surface level as I can, but I mean, you just think about, the things you've been through, and it's interesting the way things work out.
When you talk to somebody that's been through something similar like that and a similar type of upbringing with that, it's just like, you can kind of just look and be like, yeah, I get you, man. I was there too. And, people can take that and use it as an excuse as an adult. Well, I didn't have, this type of upbringing as a kid, and, lean on it as a crutch where, I can definitely tell this is something, you're going to be doing throughout your life, and something that I've done with my kids is you use it as an example of, with the absence, because, I hadn't seen my father since about 3rd grade. And, when my parents got divorced, and you look back and it's like, when you have kids of your own, you think, how in the hell could somebody not be a part of their kid's life and just go on throughout their life without being a part of them? Like, I don't have that in me. And they give you more of an example of what not to do and a path not to follow. And it seems like you had 2 fantastic examples, of a path not to follow and then a path to follow with Greg, your adopted father. And, I had a very, very similar situation with my stepdad as well. just a great guy, and a father figure that I never really had, that like you said, consistently employed, pushed me into sports, it really changed my life. So I definitely get where you're coming from with that, and it's it'll make you out to be a fantastic father. So you always remember that stuff when you have your kids in front of you, and you're going to be surprised as your kids develop and get older how those different experiences as a kid resurface in your brain as a parent, and be like, okay, I remember when this happened, and what I thought and how I felt. This is how I'm going to handle this now as a dad, because I want it to be like this for my child. And so I'm
you said it very well, what to do and what not to do. It's nice having both, right? Having something to draw on.
Absolutely. And people don't think of it like that usually, and I feel blessed to have had some bad examples in life. And you look at that and be like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to do that. I don't want that path. So you go a different way. So ever since your time at Iowa, I've always followed your story and really related to it. And so that's why I felt a lot of parallels with you and followed your career pretty closely, because I just thought that was a cool story. One thing I've heard a lot about that I just think is hilarious, and I admire a ton how you've handled it, like with a lot of grace, and you've just been super chill about it. Your teammates seem to flip you a lot of crap about your dad and giving them equipment that they want and gloves and different things like that. And it's just like, okay, here's the deal. Like, you got to put yourself in Greg's shoes a little bit. Like, the dude gets a budget. He can only have so much stuff. And then once it's gone, it's gone. And, I'm sure a lot of those guys, are like, you only think about yourself at that point. Like, I need this, I need that. You can get by with less. Okay. Like, what was it like during your time at Iowa? Because I know you still get flip crap from guys. It's just ridiculous. Like, put yourself in Greg's shoes a little bit. But what was it like being in the locker room? And did you get a lot of crap for your dad having to like do his job?
No, not when I was playing. Absolutely not. No.
Okay, that's awesome.
Guys that are good guys, good programming guys, go on to be successful in life, have great relationship with my dad. I mean, I tell you, my dad talks to Brad Banks probably multiple times a year, and so it's just kind of one of those things, right? Where if you're worried about your equipment and not having the cool equipment when you're there, you're worried about the wrong thing.
Oh, exactly.
Because that's not going to be the thing that makes a difference for you in the long run, and if you're a good program guy, you do a good job, you treat people with respect, you say please and thank you, you say, hey, how long have you been here, where are you from, you make an effort to get to know people, you're going to have great relationships, and then people are going to go out of their way to help you, period, point blank. If you're always worried about, I don't have the cool thing or the next thing, then you're going to bitch 5 years later about how somebody didn't get you a jock strap. I get it. So I was never that guy. I was always just, I had what I needed, and that was fine. And I'm going to go make the equipment look good by the way I play. And that was kind of my approach. But as far as like somebody saying something to me, no, never. It was never an issue. And dude, I mean, by the time I was a junior, I'm a shadow of my former self, right? But I was 245, all muscle, nobody was taking shots at me, man. Like that's just what it was.
You would have took them down. See, I always wondered that, because I'd heard guys just, and it was never anything serious. They're like, oh yeah, we need an extra pair of gloves, just joking around, kind of flipping crap. And in my mind, I'm like, God, I wonder if they just gave him complete shit when he was in school and gave him a hard time about that all the time. But that's good. And it's just like, we've interviewed a couple guys where they were like, they'd seen the interview with your dad and been like, yeah, he's a real stickler with the gloves and with, different things like that. And I'm like, well, you got to think about it from his perspective, man. He's got a budget to follow. And then if he runs out of stuff, he's probably got to answer to KF and, explain to him like all this stuff's gone because I was a pushover and I let guys just take stuff.
Exactly. And that's exactly, you got to come hat in hand to whoever controls the purse strings, not spring.
I knew what you meant.
Say, hey, yeah, we're out of equipment. And I did the Wash Up Walk-Ons podcast a couple of months ago, and it was, I said, I'm like, listen, if every time a receiver wanted new gloves and we gave him new gloves, we'd be out of gloves after week 4. Like it's just that's the way it is, man. We live in a finite world, and as much abundance as these players have, there is a limit to it.
No, yeah, absolutely. I don't think a lot of guys realize that there's a thing called a budget out there that you have to stay in
Yep.
between. It's infinite funds, man, at the University of Iowa. I got a cash flow like
Right.
you wouldn't believe. Oh,
Unfortunately, they found out this year it's not,
no.
unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. So hopefully things will get back to normal and they won't have to cut back like they have as of late. But
Right.
I remember a short little stint of your career, and I could be completely off on this, but I have a pretty good memory of your time at Iowa. You were rocking a stash there for a while, right? I remember the stash, and I remember, I'm this like pathetic 30-year-old guy, and I came to your game at Purdue, and I want to say it was was it your junior or senior season, and
Junior, yeah.
junior year, and I came
Terrible
up to.
timing.
Came out after, and I think you had just gotten rid of it. You had just shaved it,
Oh, man.
and I was like, "James, what's up, man?" And like you signed something for me, and I took a picture with you, and I'm like, "You need to bring back the stash." And you go, "Nope, ain't coming back. Not doing it." What was behind the mustache?
I guess my wife and all my friends will tell you this, like, especially when I was in high school and especially when I was in college, it can't be overstated how little I cared about my physical appearance. Like, I don't think I ever combed my hair. I never worried about matching clothes. Like, it was almost comical in a way. Like, if you see any photos of me just kind of out and about in college, I've got like a gas station t-shirt and pajama pants on. I mean, that was my attitude. And so it was just kind of one of those things where I didn't really care what people thought about how I looked. And I just was like, that doesn't really matter. And so me and my roommate Palmer, we're kind of free spirits, and we just do kind of weird, wonky stuff. And so I think we're like, well, James, you should grow a mustache. I'm like, all right, yeah, that'd be cool. So I just decided to grow a mustache. And so I started it, I think, like early in the season. And then I said the timing was terrible because it's kind of one of those, funny, wonky things that draws attention to yourself a little bit. And I didn't do it to draw attention to myself. I really didn't. And we ended up having a terrible season.
Yeah.
And so we're like 3/4 of the way through the season. We're not going to a bowl game. And I'm getting questions about my mustache. I'm like, this is not a good look. I need to create the appearance of being focused on playing better and not necessarily draw attention to the way I look. So I shaved it. But I'll say I've had a mustache twice since then.
Okay.
And so I know there was a lot of chatter out in the digital universe about how bad my mustache was back in 2012. So I'm proud to say I have photo evidence of bona fide mustaches that I've had since that time. It continues to. I can't grow a beard. Like right here, I got the Three Musketeers thing, the D'Artagnan going on. And so that's fine. So we always joke, if you combined myself and my brother, you'd have a pretty mean beard, because my brother has like nice chops and then like the neck beard going on, but he's got nothing right here. So I think it was, the way the jeans got split. So yeah,
that's funny.
I did a mustache when I was in Dallas, and I was just rehabbing and had no accountability to anybody other than my wife. Didn't have to be anywhere. Didn't have to be seen. So there's like a 2-month period where I grew it out. And then we did at work, not in 2020, but 2019, we did a mustache November, and we grew it out all month. And then at the end, we had like people, put money in a Folgers can, for who they thought had the best mustache, and then raise money for prostate cancer. So that was a good time. So there's some pretty good work photos of all of us with like our biker outfits on and stuff.
Awesome. Did your wife just hate it?
Oh, she hates it. Yeah, she hates it. And especially for me, like I never have one long enough to kind of really make the juice worth the squeeze, because it's like 3 to 4 weeks of awkward phase, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's dusty at first, and then it's pedophilic, and then finally then it like thickens up. And so yeah, man, I'll probably do it again at some point, but not in the near term.
It gained some traction with Hawkeye fans. You like started seeing guys with like, I remember a couple games at Kinnick, I saw guys with some fake black mustaches that they wore into the stands to support you. And I'm like, that's freaking badass. And so I remember at one point, toward the end of that season, we all grew mustaches, me and all my buddies, to commemorate your mustache.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So, if only I had Twitter, we could have had like, some social media solidarity,
I know. You put that many mustaches together, that's a serious problem. That's a lot of power right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk to you about, you hear a lot of stories about, the weight room, the conditioning and the intensity
Mhm.
of everything you guys went through, and how tough a lot of those workouts that you guys went through and that the guys now still go through. They call it the Iowa edge for a reason. You put in that work, and it gives you an edge out on the field, physically and conditioning wise as well. How did that shape you as a player going through all of that conditioning and weightlifting? And because they consistently pushed you guys to your limits on a lot of occasions.
Yeah, man. It makes you tough. A lot of it is, as much as it is the physical strength, I think the mental part of it is maybe what they're trying to sharpen as much as anything. And
Hmm.
so I can tell you, a huge, huge percentage of Iowa's success is attributable to the way that they ran, our strength and conditioning program. And you just look at it. I mean, look at the average star ranking of our recruit,
Hmm.
right? And divide it by wins. And what is that ratio? And then compare it to our peers. We probably got one of the higher ratios
Yeah.
in terms of overachieving on your talent. And I think a lot of that is getting people that maybe otherwise wouldn't be Big Ten football players to look like a Big Ten football player in
Yeah.
terms of your height and your weight. You might not necessarily be as athletic as the guy at Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State.
Hmm.
And then getting that guy really, really tough.
Yeah.
So he never quits and he never stops. And I think that's the formula. That's all it is. That's Iowa football in a nutshell. That's what it was. That's what it's going to continue to be as long as Kirk's there. And then you sprinkle in a few good athletes and you're in a BCS game every 6 years,
Yeah.
and so that's what it is. And I think a lot of people want to crap on that and say, oh, you're not trying to be elite. You're not competing for a championship every year. Well, there's plenty of programs out there that were championship programs and had more resources and abandoned their formulas because they think that they needed something new, that they weren't on the front edge of things, a la Nebraska, a la University of Texas. Look at any of the Florida schools,
Yeah.
so there's something to be said for that. Yeah.
It would be nice if we could sprinkle in a few more of those high level skill position players, because that seems to be a lot of times, the one ingredient that we're missing. But they got a pretty damn good formula there, though, and it's got a proven track record for success. So,
Yeah, and there's not enough skill players that are homegrown, and I think a
mhm.
lot of Iowa fans and just folks from the Midwest generally underestimate how irrelevant we are to a lot of the population centers where a lot of that talent is.
Yeah,
You think about kids from Florida or Atlanta or the Carolinas or just anywhere in the Bible Belt, go to Chicago, you know, they can't find Iowa on a map, let alone, conceptualize moving there, and then you show up on your visit and you're like, holy cow, it's all cornfields. And there aren't that many people that look like me. Do I really want to be here?
yeah,
And so it's a huge, huge hurdle. And recruiting is so much more efficient now than it was in the early 2000s, where we could pull some kids out of Florida.
mm.
Now there are very few diamonds in the rough anymore. Like Bob Sanders is not a 2-star if he goes through high school again.
That still blows me away that guy was ever a 2-star and only had like an offer from Ball State. Like
It doesn't happen again. Like he's just gonna get found, and
yeah,
so it's interesting. I think that's maybe why it's a little bit harder to kind of get some of those guys that we had early on. Now you really got to kind of duke it out. I mean,
okay,
there'll always be Josie Jewels, there'll always be George Kittles, but
yeah,
for you to say that that's a pillar of your program, that we're going to find the guys that other guys can't, right? That you can't repeat that. That's not reliable. It's more about the formula we talked about, right? Getting
hmm,
guys, making them look like Big Ten football players and making them tough.
yeah. With the transition in leadership, with the strength and conditioning program, do you feel like that what type of changes do you feel like there's going to be going forward? Is there going to be a drop off that we're going to see in performance from players on the field? Is there going to be a different type of feeling when it comes to, like the feel on the sidelines and the behavior from the players. What type of changes do you feel like we're going to see going forward with a new, but the guy that we have that's going to be taking over, he's been there for a long time. So I believe he's been there 15, 16 years. So do you feel like there's going to be a lot of changes?
I have no idea what they're going to change.
Yeah.
I haven't had that conversation with Coach. I haven't had that conversation with Ray. I had a great relationship with Ray when I was playing. I really liked Ray. I got a really high opinion of Ray. So I would be shocked if Ray's anything but successful, and I do know one thing about Coach, and Coach is going to make sure that his program is run the way that he wants it run. And so if things are not moving in the direction or things aren't being done in a way that is up to his standard, he's going to communicate that. So as far as what's going to change, I'd only be speculating, man. And like I said, I do have relationships with those folks. So I'm not going to get on here and say, well, Ray's going to do this different or Ray's going to do that different. I can tell you Ray's a really talented coach. Ray knows what he's doing. And I'd be shocked if he wasn't successful.
Yeah. And every player we've talked to, it has just the most unbelievably high opinion of him, and just as a person and as a coach. So your sentiment's been pretty consistent with everybody else's. They don't think there's going to be much of a change at all. But of course, the beginning of last season, when we lose our first couple, you have tons of fans out there that are like, oh, strength and conditioning program, changes, like that's what it's to. It's like, did you watch the game? It had absolutely nothing to do with that.
Penalties, turnovers, protecting the football, executing at the quarterback position, all that stuff. It's in the details like that. It's one thing if they run it for 350 yards and we can't get off a block. Like, all right, our guys aren't physically prepared.
Yeah.
But that was obviously never the case.
No, not at all. And it was exactly what you said. It's like, how is that? It didn't correlate whatsoever. So I'm excited to see, Coach get his chance to take that strength and conditioning program, and just hopefully everybody that was involved with the program ends up being better off for it and, has nothing but success going forward. I wanted to ask you too, you guys have just an insane amount, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but I know you guys all have just the most amazing stories from like the weight room, from the practice field, because we always seem to never have a lack of personalities and really interesting guys out there. And when you got a group of guys that are getting pushed to the max and you got those type of intense personalities, that creates some fun stories. Do you have anything that you remember from your playing career that you'll be sitting there working at principal and all of a sudden you'll put a smile on your face and be like, God, I remember that. That was insane.
So it's funny because like I don't have, a black book that lists out all the funny stories, from when I was at Iowa, and things will happen that'll spark a memory. Like, oh, I remember that one time. And so I'll be at work and somebody will say something. And I'll be like, hey, one time when I was at Iowa, this happened. It was funny. But we were talking about squinnies earlier.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily a football story, but it's a good Iowa college sports story. So Hillcrest is the athlete's dorm, or was the athlete's dorm. I don't think it is anymore, but so all the freshman athletes lived in Hillcrest. And so, we'd be 2 rooms down from the wrestlers, right? And they're a wild bunch of guys, like that is well known.
Yeah.
And so what happened was when I was at Iowa, a bunch of wrestlers got in trouble. And this is getting to the squid. A bunch of wrestlers got in trouble. I don't know if they're suspended or fined or what happened. But what they were doing was in the woods next to Hillcrest, they were either trapping or shooting like rabbits and squirrels, and then carrying around the courtyard. Like after they get them, people are like, sunbathing and just watching these wrestlers, in their camo carrying around these dead animals. And then they take them into their dorm rooms and then cleaned them in their dorm rooms.
Wow.
And so you go in, they'd be like these buckets of blood or whatever. And so that got around. So I'm like, that was a little different. But so I thought that was a pretty crazy story when I saw that happening.
That's awesome. Those guys, though, those wrestlers are a different breed. To be able
different breed, man.
Yeah, it's awesome, and we freaking love them, and that's one of the most well-respected programs in the country. But yeah, those guys are.
Are like they're the epitome of in one of Dave Chappelle's early stand-up. He tells a story about the guy that was like speeding, and then his line to the officer was, "I'm sorry, I didn't know I couldn't do that." That's kind of how those guys operate, right? They're like, oh, there's rabbits out there. Let's go shoot them. And then the cops show up and they're like, oh, I didn't know I couldn't do that. So.
That's awesome. You get those guys like those Iowa boys, and they usually bring guys from Pennsylvania out a lot, but a lot of those guys grew up in rural America, and you can just take out a freaking pellet
you can
gun.
Do that, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean that's what we do here. So
yep.
That's a fantastic story. I love that. James, with your transition to the National Football League, can you walk us through what that was like? How difficult was that to transition to that game? And what some of the biggest differences were for you going from the Big Ten to the NFL?
It was a huge difference. And it was really, really hard to transition. And now I've talked again on some other forums about sort of that story, but my career almost never got off the ground. And I had a really productive senior year, statistically. And I would tell you in a normal year, my weight room metrics, my athletic performance would typically be very, very competitive. And then I went to the combine. It was kind of trying to push through some injuries and had a really, really poor performance at the combine. And ended up going undrafted. And I'm not saying that's why, right? I didn't get drafted and I thought I would. And so I signed on with New England as undrafted free agent. And then my first day there, on my entry physical, I failed my physical. They found out I had a blood clot in my leg all the way from my calf up to where, the crotch of your groin is. And at the time, I didn't really realize how serious it was, but I ended up meeting with a doctor at Mass General. And the guy's like, listen, this thing is very close to breaking off to like the main vein that then runs into your heart and your lungs. And that's my big concern right now. And so I don't want you leaving this hospital, until you're on, a heavy dose of blood thinners, is basically what he said. And so I get back to the facility and I meet with kind of the coaches and whatnot. And they're like, hey, we're going to cut you for a failed physical. Go home, get this resolved. And, if it works in the future, it works in the future. And so I went home and was on the street for probably 3 months thinking I was never going to play again. And then ended up getting cleared by a doctor in Iowa City in August. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't been working out. I tried to go try out with the Patriots again in August and ended up sticking there. And then had a decent preseason and then blew out my knee in the last preseason game. And so that was my rookie year right there. Okay. Almost never happened and then ended up getting hurt. But as far as just transitioning the game, it's like I tell people if every offensive lineman was Brandon Sheriff, or if every offensive lineman was Tristan Wirfs, imagine how hard it would be to play in that universe. And the first practice I was at, we go to what is the NFL equivalent of blocks drill, or basically it's like Oklahoma, where they break the line into smaller pieces. So you have a center, 2 guards, D tackle, and a linebacker. And then they just run like inside zone tracks and you just rep that play. And it's a very high contact drill. We do it at Iowa, it would get super intense. And then we get to New England and do it. I remember the first time I watched like the guys do it, and it was like Gerard Mayo, who's an all-pro linebacker going against I'm blanking on his name. He was all pro from New England, got traded to Tampa Bay. Was
it Gronkowski?
No, he was a guard.
A guard.
I mean, he had a really good career, but it's embarrassing. I can't remember his name right now. But those 2 guys butted heads on the first play, and it sounded like a freaking bomb went off. I was like, oh my God. And I got to hit that guy that hard. Yeah, I'm physically capable of doing it. It's just a question of how am I going to feel after doing it? And how many times am I going to be able to do that and still have a career? And like, it got very real for me at that point. And so it was like one of those things where the stakes are just different. And when the stakes are different, that pushes you to do things that you wouldn't think you could do, and college is a little different, right? I mean, college, if I'm going against a good player, I'll pop them once, and have a really tough go of it. And that kind of sends a message that I'm here to compete. I'm a big dog, all of those things. But then every rep after that, I kind of, play the cat and mouse game, because I don't have to whip that guy every time. And if I have a bad play, well, I'm still on scholarship. I'm still the big dog. It's not that way in the NFL, especially if you're a fringe guy or a young guy in the NFL. You got to bring it every time. And if you don't, you're going home, And we talked about before the call, like And then it's a question of, if you're a practice squad guy, how are you paying your rent that week or that month? And so that's the stakes. And so the stakes being that high, it pushes guys to be even more physical and even more aggressive than they are in college. Combine that with the fact that they have even more ability than your average college player.
Yeah.
And you've got a really, really physical game. And so, like, the guys that play for 10 or 15 years, I mean, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. And then you see them later on down the road, guys like Earl Campbell, and just how broken they are. I mean, because physically, we are not anatomically built to do that at that level for that long. So it was intense, man. And I would probably say it took me longer to adjust to that game, that level of play, than maybe I wanted it to. Now, granted, I missed my whole rookie year. I wasn't getting a lot of reps my second year. And then my third year in Dallas, in training camp with them, that's when things kind of started to slow down and I started to get some comfortability. But then I blew out my shoulder in preseason there, and that was it, So
yeah. You were, and correct me if I'm wrong, when I was reading up on you a little bit, and I hadn't realized this, you were on the New England roster when you guys had won a Super Bowl. Am I correct?
Yeah. Great experience.
That's pretty awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? And you still got the Super Bowl ring? Do you ever bust it out? That's a pretty cool thing to have.
It's really cool. It's a treasured possession. And just being a part of that team and being a part of that group of guys was really awesome. We had a really good room. Pat Graham was our linebacker coach. The linebackers in that room were Drob Mayo, linebacker coach at New England now, who's interviewing for head coaching jobs. Dante Hightower is Pro Bowler. Jamie Collins, Pro Bowler. And, for my money, when Jamie was at his peak, he was probably the best all-around linebacker in the NFL. Maybe the most underrated player in the NFL at that time. But his performance throughout his career has seesawed. But when he's at the top, I mean, there's nobody better. And then some other guys that were just, good, hardworking, team first guys. I mean, we had a great room. We had great chemistry. They were very intellectual in their approach to the game. And we did some really cool stuff schematically. And it was a really great place to learn football. And I learned more in that year of football than I have in any other point in my career. And then getting to go to New York after that with Spagnuolo, who's now kind of had a wonderful career renaissance with the Chiefs and really has that defense playing well. And then going to Dallas and being with Marinelli, who was a legend. I mean, it was I feel really blessed to have played for the coaches that I played for because, I got to learn, Dungy's Tampa 2 from Marinelli, Spagnuolo's multiples defense, and then Belichick's multiples defense. And then the thing I respected and loved about Bill so much is just how available he was from the standpoint of, I could ask Bill a schematic question and Bill would be able to answer it and give me like historical references. He's like, well, this is what we did with Lawrence Taylor in the 90s. Wow. And we had an issue here, so we changed it. So that's why we do that. And that really helped me because if I understood the why, I didn't necessarily have to have the vocabulary memorized. It was, I could back into it based on a situation in the field. Like if I see something on the field, I'm like, oh, this is an issue. This is what we need to be worried about. And then that's how I'm going to adjust my alignment or how I play it. And there aren't a lot of senior coaches in the NFL that can do that. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes Bill special and he's generally smarter than most people. Like he just has a high IQ.
Yeah.
But he just knows it. He understands the why. And he's available. And, for me being an undrafted free agent, to stick my head in Bill's office and say, hey, Bill, you said this thing. I had a question about that. And he'd take 5 minutes to explain it to me. And I've had NFL coaches shoo me out of their office saying, no, I don't have time to explain to you the thing that you need to know to stay employed here. I don't have time to teach you that. I've had people say that to me. I mean, and Bill's not that way. Even though he could be a mean son of a gun, it's not necessarily a guy you want to have a beer with. I respected him because he was available, and he knew his shit.
Well, that's awesome that you said that because that was actually going to be my next question. So I appreciate that. And, obviously he's one of the best to ever do it. And he's like you said, an extremely intelligent guy. I want to end with this last question. It always seems like it's just a fact that the New England Patriots especially don't necessarily draft a lot of Hawkeyes, but they definitely pick them up after the draft from free agency. What is it about being a Hawkeye and playing under Kirk Ferentz that makes you so well respected as a pro coming in? Because it seems like there's a certain level of immediate credibility that especially guys like Bill Belichick knows that if he's going to get a Hawkeye in there, and that if KF gives you the thumbs up and the seal of approval, you're going to come in there, you're going to do your job, and you're going to work hard.
Yes, it's real. It's 100% true, and it's kind of one of those things when you hear it bantered around, you're like, oh, is this thing just oversold? Is it us just patting ourselves on the back? But my experience was that it's very real and it's very true. And I think it's just the ability to know that someone is coming from a disciplined, structured environment, and they're going to put the team first. And I just think those are some of the most unanswerable questions when you're looking at a guy from, a mid-tier no-name school. This guy's really talented. He's had some strong individual performance, but we don't know much about the team's culture. We don't know much about this kid's worldviews. And so there's an assurance just based on coach's track record and the guys that came before me that we all benefit from that. And I think it's largely true. I mean, guys come in, they're disciplined, they're hardworking, they do well in structure, and they put the team first. And I'd say putting the team first, and particularly New England, that's one thing that's a little bit more real in New England than it is in some other places, and that they really do put the team first as much as you can. It's a star-driven league.
Yeah.
Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, and Julian Edelman sell a hell of a lot more tickets, a hell of a lot more gear than I do.
Yeah.
And so there's always some of that. Those guys are going to be marketed. But in terms of schemes and what they ask people to do on a weekly basis, New England is, I would say, more team first than a lot of other places. And I kind of alluded to, some of the schemes we did that gave us maximum optionality, but you do that at the expense of a lot of people's individual performances. So like if, let's say, Von Miller was going to play defensive end in New England. Well, if Von Miller, every time they drop back to pass, Von Miller has the option to rush the quarterback as he sees fit, he's going to get 15 sacks a year.
Yeah.
But if every time you drop back to pass, Von Miller has maximum optionality to rush, you can scheme against that.
Yeah.
And it makes it harder for Von to be successful. It makes it harder for us to be successful as a defense. A good multiples defense is all about keeping the offense guessing. And so New England has a number of packages where they give someone like a Gerard Mayo, or I'm not going to say myself, but that was always what I aspired to be the guy that controlled the optionality of the defense and say, based on this look, Von, you're not going to rush. You're going to act like you're going to rush, and then you and I are going to create a 2-on-1 effect on the tackle, and then we're going to force him to be wrong.
Okay.
And they create, through their schemes, more situations like that than most defensive coordinators do in the league. And so it's the idea is if you trust the guys that sort of execute the options, so you need a Gerard Mayo, you need a Dante Hightower, you can create situations organically on the field that confuse the offense, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to just call that play as a defensive coordinator. So it's the optionality is baked into the defense, and there was no other defense that I see or was a part of that was like that. And that's why you look at New England's defense this past year, how little talent they had, how successful they were. And it's because they have the right people in the right situations, and they're just always confusing offenses. And so I loved it. I could have stayed there for 15 years and played there if it had been up to me. I love this game.
I'm geeking out big time right now, James. Like the information, the football talk, like this is like next level stuff I haven't gotten to with anybody.
Well, it's like,
it's great.
Okay, I'll tell you one more story, but a lot of football geeks know what a double mug look is, right? Where your defensive tackles are wide, and then you walk up the two linebackers on the center. And the idea is you don't know who's coming. One could be coming, or they both could be dropping out, or they both could be coming. And then in addition to them both becoming, they can run pick games based on where the center sets. So the idea is if the center sets to one linebacker, then the linebacker he doesn't set to is going to pick him. He's going to try and hit him, and then the other guy wraps around. So the idea is no matter who you block, you're wrong.
Okay.
And so then they do different things. The offense will do different things to kind of solve around that. Well, what Bill would do is he'd say, well, I'm not going to pick the center because the centers, let's say he's their best offensive lineman, he's their smartest guy. Maybe so-and-so on the offensive line had like a bad week last week. I'm going to run double mug on that guy. So I remember we were playing the Ravens in the playoff game, and Kalichi Assemble, I think I'm saying it right. I know his first name's Kalichi. He's an Iowa State guy. He worked me over when I was a freshman at Iowa. But we were playing Baltimore, and Bill basically said, I don't think Kalichi can handle the double mug look and passing an idea. And so instead of double mugging over the center, we double mug over Kalichi all game, and they got like 2 sacks off of it.
Nice.
And so they're picking it in all these schemes. And so that's why I said just the way they operate as a defense is like there's general rules, but we're not necessarily a slave to the rule. And most defenses, even at Iowa, most defenses, they tend to be a slave to the rule. Whereas Bill is basically saying, I'm going to take a concept and I'm going to put it where it's going to be most effective. And they did that better than anybody else in the league. And that's why they're the best, in my opinion. One example why they're the best. Yeah,
the best organization in the NFL and the most consistently good. So that's a great story, James. Thanks for sharing all that with us.
No problem.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I loved it. It was a great organization. It's certainly a new epoch with Tom being gone, but my guess is they'll still be competitive. I mean, they had a lot of talent opt out last year, and that really hurt them.
People don't talk about that a lot with them. They don't talk about all the guys that opted out.
Well, the NFL is different than college. My agent, who's Kirk's agent, he explained this to me once. He's 100% right. The NFL is close to a fair fight. College is not a fair fight. In the NFL, you get 1 first rounder a year.
Mm-hmm.
In college, you get as many first rounders as you want. So Nick Saban gets 5 or 6 first rounders a year, but he gets them coming out of high school. But they're still first rounders.
Yep.
That's just not fair.
Yeah.
And so in the NFL, where you draft at has a huge impact. And so the biggest challenge for New England has been like the longer you win, the harder it is to stay on top, not just from the standpoint of inertia, but from the standpoint of you're drafting later. And so there are only so many good bona fide players. And so when you are in the back half of the first round for 10 years in a row, you are in such a worse position than someone who's been in the front half of the first round for however long they have. You look at like the Cleveland Browns, the amount of talent they have.
Yeah.
And New England's the opposite, and it's because they're drafting in the top 10 every year. And so that has finally caught up to New England, at least over this most recent cycle, after. So it's interesting. There's a lot of factors at work as to why they're kind of struggling right now.
I had some fans of other college fan bases call me a borderline communist because I said that at some point it would be great that if we had some sort of level that if like you rank out the recruits that every year you could only have one school could only sign so many 5 stars, so many 4 stars, so many 3 stars. So you had to be more selective about who you're taking and when you're taking them, not just loading up on the top talent, seeing where they all fall, and then the guys that don't make it end up transferring like crazy, and you got guys going back and forth. In my opinion, if the NCAA went to a little bit of a system like that where you could only get so many guys at a star level, I think that would level the playing field and make the game a lot more interesting because it's so top heavy right now, and it's been for so long. I think college football is the greatest game on the planet, but it has not been the most fun game to watch over the last 3 or 4 years.
Man, we are really going down the wormhole, but the returns on capital exceed the rate of growth. In other words, the rich get richer.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case in college football. But like what you talked about, that's what the NFL is. It's a talent cartel. They've all agreed on how we're going to allocate resources and ideas. They all benefit because the game is competitive as opposed to one person pulling away. And college isn't that way. College is feudalist. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and we'd need another hour to talk about that. But you touched on a really good point.
No, absolutely.
I mean, somebody would call you a communist for that proposal, but would they consider the NFL communist, or would they say that the players in the players union are greedy? What would that same person say? So it's interesting, the way people think about things relative to the way they've always been. The NFL's always been that way, so I don't see it as a problem, right?
We're going to have you back on in the next 3 or 4 months and just hit this again because I
don't know, man. If we talk about this, I might get myself in trouble. So.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for
Yeah.
taking an hour out of your busy schedule with everything. And again, I just want to say congratulations on the baby coming in, and just hope that everyone's happy and healthy, and that everything goes great. And make sure to tell your wife congratulations too. That we're super happy for you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This has been awesome, and we're really excited.
Man, James, I had so much fun talking to you, man. A freaking blast. One of
That's
my favorite
awesome.
one of my favorite interviews all time, dude. I had such a good time. So thank
I
you
love
so
looking
much.
at your background, man. I love looking at that.
I got a lot of stuff, man. Got a lot of
Yeah, that's
stuff.
awesome.
All right, man. Well, hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again sometime. And we always end everything here with the Go Hawks.
All right, on me.
Yeah, on you, baby. Let's do it.
All right,
Go Hawks.
go Hawks.
Woo!
Yep.
All right. Thanks, James.
See you, boss.